thanks to you all for being interested in democracy, I guess. This is your one chance at it. Once every 3 years you get to go tick. And one of these middle-aged gentlemen on my left will be your representative. He will share your views. Steve Wilkinson from Golden Bay, representing Legalised Cannabis Party. So remember that we are talking about being governed. This is the tyranny of democracy. And we are going to run tonight's meeting. Each candidate will get 2 minutes to introduce themselves and their policies. And then I've got a series of questions to ask them. And they will have 2 minutes for some of the questions and 1 minute for the others. But without further ado, because a good game's a quick game, we will start with 2 minutes. Steve Wilkinson.
Good evening, my name is Stephen Wilkinson. I'm representing Aotearoa Legalised Cannabis Party. I live in Golden Bay. I stand up every 3 years and give my support to ALCP because I feel that these parties here aren't dealing with the cannabis issue responsibly. We have the Green Party, who has marginalised the cannabis issue to gain a larger conservative voting base. We have Labor, who's signed coalition agreements with personality parties that denied them from looking at the legality of cannabis. And we've had National Party, whose leader just 2 days after the John Campbell show did a poll which returned 72% wanting prohibition removed, he stood up and he said, I feel the majority of New Zealanders don't want to decriminalise marijuana. During the Labour's stand, we paid for a health select committee to look into reclassifying cannabis. They received out of the submissions they received, 75% wanted to move away from prohibition. They ignored the over 1,000 postcards from the normal organisation that asked for legalisation. If they counted those, there would have been 95% wanting change. Because people realise that prohibition has failed us, it has failed our children, and we need to look at another way of dealing with this drug in our society, and the most logical way is legalisation with regulation. With regulation, we can put restrictions on the drug, restrictions on the age, on where it's sold, and how it's used. While prohibition is happening, the gangs are getting the money, and we are being denied over $1 billion industry's tax. Thank you very much.
So the first question is on the economy, and just a short introduction. Considering the instability in the Greek economy and the Eurozone in general, and the continuing inability of governments worldwide to meet interest payments on loans, and the fact that the New Zealand government continues to borrow $250 to $300 million per week, leads to a more unstable economic future as we struggle to pay our way. So the question is, what austerity measures would your party take to reduce government spending, to reduce the need for borrowing? And secondly, why is it right for the government to continue to portray that a growth economy is sustainable in a world of diminishing resources? And Stephen.
Personally, I think the country should forfeit on all its foreign debt loans. You mentioned Greece and the Eurozone, where France and Germany loaned money they didn't have to countries like Greece and Italy and others. Now these countries are unable to pay their repayments. Greece, by accepting the bailout package, is effectively selling its country. For decades, this poor will be burdened with this debt and not the well-to-do. We have to remember we cannot survive this by borrowing our way out, like the main parties will recommend. Any austerity measures must be multi-pronged, and I can only speak about the things I know about. But I can't voice it loud enough. Forfeit on the loans. These conditions have been caused by bankers and speculators and why should we lose sovereignty to our country for the greed of the greedy? If a strict regulation design was established and the government legalised cannabis, straight off the bat they would save $100 million on law and order budget. With a well-designed regulation, the government could start receiving tax and GST from the sale of the more than $1 billion cannabis industry. Ignoring the pharmaceutical industry, the New Zealand could straight away invest in research into the medicinal properties of the plant and develop medicines that are shown to cure cancer and brain tumours, as well as proven to grow new brain cells back. Get informed, people. You're all computer savvy, you can go to Google and you can type in cannabis cures cancer. Get informed, have a look. Okay, the camp or hemp market has been laying idle with the ability to produce products from paper right through to automotive parts. We can make these things here, we can produce quality products and export them. We can supply our current fuel needs through hemp. We can produce paper from tissues to cardboard without the harmful, costly process that pulp wood needs. Any product that is petroleum-based can be produced using non-toxic hemp. To list all the products would take more than 2 minutes. So get informed, people. Google use of hemp plant. You ask, why is it right that the government continues to portray a growth economy? Well, they have no right. Whether it's the economy or development or growth, it has to be sustainable. Living within our means will be the way forward. Thank you.
I want to note that there are now 7 billion people in the world. That's 7,000 million. And many of them are starving and desperately poor in a world of ever-decreasing resources. And New Zealand has rising numbers of unemployment and poverty-stricken families with all the health and social problems that come with that. So the question is, what will you do to address the inequality between the rich and poor in New Zealand and to help every person find a meaningful place in an overpopulated world? And we'll start this with Stephen.
Now, of course, people are starving in the world. That's what happens when third world countries are forced to grow cash crops to pay for those IMF and World Bank development loans their governments were forced to take on, instead of food for their communities. If governments ignore the UN treaty they were forced to sign that says we must keep cannabis illegal, the cannabis seed can be harvested in these poverty-stricken areas to feed communities. Hemp seed amino acid profile is close to complete when compared to more common sources of protein such as meat, milk, eggs and soy. And we can talk about closing the gap with Australia, but how about closing the gap between the lowest paid and the highest paid? How about a fairer tax system like the Tobin's tax, rather than placing the burden on middle income and small businesses' shoulders? And why should workers lose out just so that companies can report billion-dollar after-tax profits? Is it possible that a small percentage of those billions go back to fairer wages? And currently, if you're convicted of possession or cultivation of cannabis, you're stigmatised for the rest of your lives. While this is happening, how on earth can you find a meaningful place in society, let alone the world? When John Key lowered the tax for the rich, Bill English said, if we lower the top tax bracket, then the wealthy won't bother avoiding paying tax by utilising the loopholes. How about closing the loopholes?
So, who's going to be best for you or your unemployed friends in rich white Mapua? The next topic is education. So the purpose of education is to provide a sufficient knowledge and understanding for the student to have a fulfilling role in society. The question is, what measures will you take to ensure students of all ages are offered the highest standard of education they need? And how will you enact these measures across all areas of society so as to ensure an equality of education and opportunity despite social or economic differences? And lastly, Stephen, on welfare. Education. We are well up to it.
If it is true, and the purpose of schools is to provide sufficient knowledge and understanding for the students to have a fulfilling role in society, then we better close down our schools, which are not much more than a state-funded institutionalised babysitting service. We ingrain into them the authority is always right. Sit down, be quiet, wait your turn, listen to the teacher is always right. This conditioning goes through to modern universities. The lecturers are always right. Argue and your score drops. Then to the workplace, the boss is right, it's his business. If you argue, you might get fired. Rather than focus on national standards, how about encouraging creativity, lateral thinking and problem solving? Stop funding private schools and fund independent schools. In fact, let's fund state schools. I was shocked when I found out that my local high school was in the red, so much that it's never ever going to clear that debt. Teachers have more of an idea of what does and doesn't work in schools, not some minister whose only experience is in local government and who's intent on pushing her party's outdated skills testing regime, a regime which was dumped by the British education system. Cannabis is definitely not suited for young developing minds. We're all in agreement with that. For young people, cannabis is easier to get than alcohol or tobacco. This is because these two social drugs are regulated, which controls age restriction. Cannabis has no age restriction because the guy at the gang's tinny house only sees the money. Prohibition allows the young to obtain cannabis. You have the government and well-doers saying we need to keep cannabis illegal to stop our kids getting hold of it. If they're getting it while it's prohibited, shouldn't we regulate it and access it that way? Obviously, prohibition has failed.
The next question is on the environment. And in the current economic equation, a very low dollar value is given to the environmental costs of modern life and business. For example, farm nutrient runoff, town sewage outflow, or clear felling forests. What I want to know, and what people here would be interested to hear, is what will you do to ensure that the environmental concerns are included in all areas of decision making and that the real costs of environmental impact are accounted for?
The answer to this question is quite a simple one. Just legislate responsibly. Stop big business from lobbying the government throughout the process. Give submissions equal weight. In fact, pass a law that disallows corporations from lobbying at all. This country is for New Zealanders, not corporations. They just get to have the privilege to operate within this country. They do not have the right to dictate our employment and environmental policies just to ensure the cheapest production for the lowest cost. Fonterra, for an example, is not much different. Shareholders come before New Zealanders. I heard Fonterra's CEO say on Radio National, if the rest of the world is willing to pay this price for our product, why shouldn't New Zealand? There's more money available in growing hemp than replanting our failed forestry estate. Farming communities could form cooperatives and grow enough cannabis to supply the farming co-op its annual fuel needs. This is a plant that can do more good for the environment than any other plant around. This plant is much more than just the high. So, Wikipedia the word hemp, and please get informed. Bottom line, throw big business out of Parliament. Nothing wrong with individuals or community concern groups lobbying their representative, but this process needs to be transparent. Just like the proof from scientific reviewed research, proving the benefits of cannabis medicinally. It needs to be out for all the people to look at and to discuss. That is how societies grow with respect to everyone within the society. Our politicians need to be responding to the facts. They should be reading this stuff themselves instead of listening to the lobbyists from the alcohol, tobacco and pharmaceutical industries. So it doesn't matter whether it's the environment or education, if you let business dictate laws to expedite its profit, then everything suffers.
The fifth question is the sale of assets. And this is why or why not. Why does your party support the sale of some of such state-owned assets? How much would you expect to make from the sales, and what would you spend it on?
I understand the concept of assets. If they're good assets, why would you sell them?